Welcome to the Write Project podcast, where we discuss writing, publishing, and everything books. I am your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of the LeDrew series and Infinity novels, and partner at Engine Books. I have with me my co-hosts, author Amanda Labonté, and fellow author and publisher, Ellen Curtis. Apologies for any issues with the audio on today's broadcast. We were recording during some torrential rain, but have done the best we can to edit out the effect. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the writing on some blockbuster movies that have come out recently, as well as the differences between small press and indie publishing, things to avoid for those taking each route, and the different ways to start a scene. Okay, so it's towards the end of November now. I think it'll actually be the end of November by the time this comes out. And a few days ago, I finished my NaNoWriMo goal. It's Family Values. It's going to be the fourth LeDrew novel. The third one comes out in December, in a few days' time. So I'm super stoked about that. I've got it over 75,000, but I've had this phenomenal week. I've written over 10,000 words this week, and I gotta say that I'm converted. Cue clip of Matt from the first episode saying, "Oh, I don't know, it seems a bit weird, like, for an established author to be doing the NaNoWriMo thing," but the whole goal and word tracker and all that stuff, it's super cool. I like it.
You need a gimmick?
I do. I need a gimmick. I need something it helps motivate. Yeah, it really does.
We're all super glad you met your goal already, Matt.
How are you doing?
I'm still writing.
Did you start in November?
I did start in November. I did.
You didn't have any of that novel written in November?
Oh, I had part of the novel written, but, I've been writing every day in November to add to it. I didn't have the novel, I need to get 50,000 more words done.
Yes.
Yes. It wasn't a start-to-finish novel.
Gotcha.
I had it already. I thought I had it mapped out, and then I started writing it and realized that what I thought was the first third of the book is actually that book.
So are there going to be 4 Call of the Sea books
Well,
now?
I don't know. But I do know that this book is not exactly how I thought it would be, but I think it's what it needs to be.
Yeah, it's probably better for that. That happens a lot, is you go in with this plot, and you'll think, oh, this is good. And one or two things, it's very rare that it's exactly as you planned. It's either, nope, the first third of the book, what the plan was, is the entire book, or the opposite, and you've finished your plot, and you're only 20,000 words in, and you're like, aw.
This is problematic.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have been very productive either way, so A+ effort.
Yeah. What have you been working on?
I have been working on getting through the Chillers from the Rock submissions, so that is ongoing.
How is that? How many, of the, 50-ish that we got in, how many are you through, do you think, roundabout at this time?
About halfway through.
Okay. Without naming names,
Yeah.
of those 25-ish,
Uh-huh.
how many of them do you think are winners, that are good contenders to get into the final product?
Well, so far the quality has been really high, so I can't say for certain which ones will get through at this point, just because they're all so good. With rare exception, they're doing really well. So it's not going to be a matter of is it good or bad, and it gets in if it's good.
It rarely is.
Yeah. But even more so than last year or the year before, it's going to be more dictated by what fits the theme best and what goes with the other stories best.
Would you say that in all the years you've been doing these anthologies that the submissions get better and better as you go?
Oh yeah, the submissions get way better and better, and every year we seem to be getting more new authors come out who haven't participated before in submissions and who are unpublished and who have absolute gems that they're submitting. And we're also getting more and more established authors coming out all the time and submitting, sometimes in their usual genre and sometimes outside of their usual genre, and kind of challenging themselves. So it's really great to see what we're producing as a province right now.
Yeah, I really like it. Speaking of established people, we've got some cool talent lined up to announce at a later date for the Chillers from the Rock.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, so some cool Chillers genre talent to go along with our fresh indie faces, so that's going to be fun. Look out for those announcements. Any word on Melanie Collins yet? Have you read her story?
No, I'm saving that one till last.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
She'll be happy to hear that.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
It's coming up on December, so we've got are a bunch of genre movies coming out now. The big three that I'm looking at are Thor Ragnarok, which just came out, Justice League, and we are coming up on Star Wars in December as well. So I want to get your guys' take on the ones that are either you've seen or that you're excited for seeing. And yeah, we'll see what we'd like to do over the holidays, I guess, in terms of movie going.
I haven't seen any of them yet. Only 2 of them are out. I was moderately looking forward to Thor. You know, I'm gonna see it. Not enough that I've seen it yet, even though it's been out for a few weeks. But I'm like, oh, I hope I find time to see that. And if I don't have time before it gets out of theaters, I won't be disappointed. I won't be like, oh, shucks, I missed something. I'll just be like, okay, I'll wait for DVD or Netflix or whatever.
I think we've seen every Marvel movie to date, though, in theater, so it's kind of...
No, we didn't see Thor 2. Thor seems to be our... We didn't consciously not go see it. It's just one of those, like, for some reason, the Thor franchise, we're just like, it doesn't matter if we don't see it. And I don't know why. I love Chris Hemsworth in the role. I like the whole thing. I have not seen Justice League. I'm still a bit burnt from Batman v Superman, although Wonder Woman was amazing. So I'm hearing a lot of good things. Like, all the critics are saying very negative things, but every human, like physical human I know that's gone to see it has come out saying, no, it's good. And I'm not sure, part of me thinks there's a correlation there where, like, there's so much bad press that people are going in with low expectations, and as a result, a movie that's, not spectacular. It's not The Godfather or The Shawshank Redemption, but it's decent. Like, when you go in with rock bottom expectations and you get a movie that's passable, middle of the range, then it seems spectacular. I mean, if you look back, I don't want to start a thing, but I love the first Iron Man. It's one of my favorite superhero movies, or favorite movies, period. But I think it very much benefited from the fact that I went into it with zero expectations, because before that he was not like a name that everyone knew. Like, he was a name that just hardcore comic book people knew. It's weird to think of that time when Iron Man was not an everyday name, but it was the case. And so, like, I feel like that movie greatly benefited from that. Star Wars, I'm not looking forward to. Those trailers do not look good to me. I think it's gonna go haywire.
Yeah. No.
So Amanda, you saw Justice League, right?
I saw Justice League. I did not see Thor. I saw Justice League with my 12-year-old and my husband. So we all went into it, the two of them in particular, with low expectations because of Batman versus Superman. I was ready to enjoy it, and so I did. The feeling from my son was he had a great time. My husband thought it was better than he was expecting, and it was... It
would have to be.
Yeah, but he didn't think it was on Avenger level yet. Yeah. My feeling on it, though, was I really enjoyed those particular superheroes. I love Wonder Woman, and I love the way she's being portrayed, and I think that what Justice League kind of has going for it more than Avengers is the female component, because you have Wonder Woman, who is super strong, but Lois Lane also had like a really good part in this movie. And for the girlfriend role, she actually, I think, is a little stronger than Pepper. Yeah. I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to say it. I'm going to get hate mail, but I'm going to say
No, that's fair. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm going to put your Engine Books email address on the screen at this point for the hate mail. But, that's fine. I like Pepper Potts, but that's
I like her. And it could be that I'm a former journalist, so
She's also
have
not
a special place in my heart for Lois Lane.
She's fine. Like, Pepper was fine in the first Iron Man, and even the second. She was best in the first one, but like her role in the Avengers movie was just this perfunctory, like, oh, we've got to have Pepper here. Like, she wasn't a part of the movie.
And I felt like Lois Lane was a part of this movie, and obviously Wonder Woman was a big part of this movie, and Aquaman was amazing.
There's also, I feel like a lot of the critics, I think we're in this place of this media landscape where it's very hard to go into a movie cold without knowing a bunch of the stuff beforehand, and as a result, you're not just going in, and maybe you did, and maybe a lot of people are that are enjoying it, are going in and without having known a bunch of stuff. But like, I know that this was originally 2 movies that they cut down to 1, and I feel like a lot of the critics know that, and I feel like you're going in, and instead of going in like you did, ready to enjoy the movie, some part of your brain is looking to try and figure out, like, the puzzle of what was in this originally and what wasn't. That's something to do on your 5th viewing if you like it that much. That's not something to do on your first viewing. To which I kind of say, critics, you know, if you think you're going in with that viewpoint, maybe have a couple stiff drinks before you go see a movie. Like, just to shut down that part of your brain.
I think the thing that I went in looking for was to see if I could figure out which parts Joss Whedon had directed.
You probably can.
Yeah, I think I can,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed it more for that. But I didn't go in looking for... because I didn't know it was supposed to be 2 movies, so maybe that did help.
There's also been evidence from the journalists who act like they're investigative reporters that, like, but from between the first set of trailers and the second, like, there's the same scenes used for them, and it seems like Joss Whedon, like, changed the color grade a lot to make it more, like, bright and flashy, because in the 2 sets of trailers, there are scenes the same that are lit completely differently. It's almost like they, in the first one, artificially contrasted to be dark and broody like Batman v Superman, and in the later cuts, like, were like, no, colorful!
That seems to happen a lot, though, in terms of movies, like, between the original trailers being released and
Suicide
subsequent
Squad?
ones. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sure. So, I don't know that you should put too much into that.
No.
That's just part of the normal editing process.
I haven't seen it. I can't judge it. And, like, the fact that literally everyone I know that's gone and seen it has come back with positive to neutral reviews is telling.
So you say you're not excited for Star Wars, though?
Not in the least
Whereas,
bit.
Amanda, I know we've talked about this before, and both of us kind of do the same thing, where on Boxing Day we'll go into the movies.
Yes.
And that's on my list this year.
Yes.
For a Boxing Day movie.
Yeah, we've done Star Wars. Well, we did Rogue One last year, and we did The Force Awakens the year before.
I love The Force Awakens. I have tried to watch Rogue One 3 times and can't watch it. It's just horrid.
I'm upset that you feel that way because it's so good.
It's so bad.
The thing about Rogue One, I've watched it once,
Yep.
and I'm really glad I watched it once. But what I think that Rogue One does is make the movies 4, 5, and 6 better.
Yes.
Because it plugs some plot holes, and for that, I think the fact that you can put out a prequel that actually strengthens 4, 5, and 6.
The fact that it's technically a Star Wars prequel that was good.
That I don't
miracle.
hate is amazing.
Yeah.
I also enjoy the fact that it feels like the most war movie out of all the Star Wars movies. Yeah. But I am excited for the up-and-coming, the 8th episode.
Sure. A couple things in the trailer were just really worrying to me. And a trailer's just a trailer. You know what I mean? It's not... Yeah. Trailers aren't cut together by the director. So, oftentimes. So, it could be that it's just all wrong. There's a couple things, and this isn't a criticism of the movie, but it just irks me. There are a lot of tonal things that bug me about the trailer, and maybe that's all going to be gone. Maybe, like, I'll go see it, and hopefully I'll enjoy it and love it. It seems a bit dark. It seems like it's going in a very weird direction, and I don't know how I feel about it.
Do you really think that there's going to be, like, a big miss, though, after what, by all accounts, have been 2 big hits?
I hope not. I don't think so. But I think it's too big to fail, at some point, though. Like, I want it to be good and continue the thematic things that were going on with the first one, with the Force Awakens, I should say. Mm-hmm. There's a very nerdy thing that bugs me, and that is Luke Skywalker's robot hand. This is nothing to do. This is not, when I'm saying I don't think I'm going to enjoy it, it has nothing to do with this. But I loved in the original 3 Star Wars movies, 4, 5, and 6, that his robot hand just looked like a normal hand, and he had this little panel on it that you open up and did it. And to me, that seemed more futuristic. That it looked, acted, and seemed to feel like a robot hand was like, oh, that's great. But in the prequels, they had Anakin Skywalker's robot hand be this weird, golden, misshapen bunch of gear. It looked like steampunk. And I was like, what's going on with this? And now in the trailers for the new movie, they have Luke's hand again in this overly roboticized. It looks like Johnny Five from the Short Circuit movies. If he had a hand, that's what it would look like. And I'm like, why? Why can't it just be a normal hand?
Because I think it implies that he's been away from technology and civilization for so long that it's fallen into disrepair.
That hand got shot in Return of the Jedi, and you could
Do you
see
think he
the
went
gears
straight
inside.
from Return of the Jedi to that island and nothing else?
No, but I do think that the outside of the hand that we saw throughout Return of the Jedi is it's just like a glove.
Yeah.
It's just like a skin glove. And that's what's underneath. What you see in the trailer.
So like when the Terminator pulls off the skin on his hand, it's got this fucked up thing underneath, that's what happens?
I don't watch Terminator. And
have you seen the Terminator?
I have not.
Have you seen the Terminator?
Under, like, pain, yes.
I have something interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you?
I do. I think I do. So the term Jedi is both singular and plural.
Yes, yes.
And in French, the French translation of the title for The Last Jedi is Les Derniers Jedi, which means that it's plural.
Whoa.
So it doesn't necessarily mean the singular Last Jedi, it means the group of the Last Jedi. Possibly. People who found the French title and speak French online have been having a really good time with this.
Yeah, I would buy more into that then.
I would enjoy it if instead of it being about The Last Jedi, as in like, oh...
The final?
Yeah, instead of it being the final Jedi, it's the story of The Last Jedi. Like if a bunch of the story is in flashbacks telling the previous Jedi. Like the word last like that can mean a lot of things.
I hate flashbacks.
Do you?
I do.
Do you? Are there any flashbacks in Call of the Sea?
Very few.
Now there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, and it is actually related to Justice League and Gal Gadot, and that is how it's been reported that she's planning on not signing for another Wonder Woman movie unless Brett Ratner steps away completely
That's
from the
happened.
films. And that has, yeah.
That's great.
It's awesome.
Not only is, by all accounts, is he a horrible human being, he's a horrible director. He's very bad. He's not good at this stuff.
So what do you think, then, is carrying people like that through Hollywood if there's not even talent behind it?
That was my question! I'm sitting here like, when someone... There's no way for me to say this that isn't going to sound horrible, but if I found out tomorrow that, like, the biggest star in Hollywood was also, like, a horrible person committing these heinous acts, I would be like, well, that's how he got away with it then. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
well,
it's because he's such a big name. Yes, he was very powerful, exactly. But when you are the go-to, the butt of the joke, oh, it's a sequel, we'll give it to Brett Ratner. Like, when you are that guy, like, when you want to make a shitty sequel that just capitalizes on the good director before, who do you give it to? You give it to Brett Ratner. So how, like, the Hannibal series, Red Dragon, Brett Ratner. The X-Men series, the X-Men The Last Stand, Brett Ratner. Like, every time there's like, oh, we had a good one. Who we get to do the second one? Let's get Brett Ratner. Like, if you don't want your sequel to be The Empire Strikes Back, if you want it to be the opposite of that, you get Brett Ratner. So I don't understand how that guy got away with this.
But I guess the implication is that it's endemic in Hollywood, too.
Yeah, that's the implication.
And I think more interesting, Gal Gadot is actually as interesting as it's nice that the actress took the stand.
It's nice that she's flexing her muscles on and off screen.
Yeah.
Which is good.
I agree.
Yeah.
The big thing that kind of up-and-coming writers really want to get into is the difference between traditional and independent publishing, or indie publishing, and then is there a difference between indie publishing and self-publishing? And I think every one of them, including myself, had a different perspective on what all of that meant.
Indie publishing...
How would you, because I had a definition for them, how would you define indie?
Indie and small press are really almost the same thing, because it's just, indie just means independently owned, like not a company attached to it, which is by nature self-published, unless it's a very weird arrangement where you, Amanda, wanted to be a publisher, but you only wanted to publish Ellen's books. And so instead of her doing it herself, she did it through you. You're not a company, you're only publishing this one person, which is one product does not a company make, kind of thing. So that would be the only circumstance, but why would she do that? Why wouldn't she just do it herself and be self-published at that point? So, like, a true independent company is weird and rare, because it's basically just self-publishing. Like, it happens all the time, but it's basically, we call ourselves indie. We're proud of the term indie and being grassroots and being very like that, but we're really small press. Like, we have the same structure and a board and all like this of a traditional publisher, just on a smaller budget.
I think that the big difference, though, is that as opposed to the traditional publishers, independent portion of it is the biggest one. The independent is that we're self-governing. We're not answering to investors, let's say.
Yeah. Or advertisers, or market whims, or anything like that. That's a big part of being independent. Self-published is very obviously just, it didn't go through anyone else's hands. Like, you might have hired an editor, you might have given it to beta readers, but you're the only person who's making the decision. You're it. And you're sending it off to a printer. And if there's one thing I can impart to people who are going down that route that most people buying your book won't notice, but if they're at all in the industry, when you're filling out your survey of all the book information, and it's like, put the title here, put the name of the author here, yada yada yada, there's two things not to do, and it just, because it shows up every now and again, unless it's an anthology, or unless the editor is of special note, like if Stephen King edited this book, or if it's an anthology with multiple authors, then you put in the editor. But if it's just Amanda wrote a novel and hired an editor, and the editor went through it for money and passed it back, don't put the editor in that list of metadata, because then when it goes on Amazon or Chapters or Indigo or wherever, it'll show up Amanda Labonté in parentheses author, comma, Joe Blow in parentheses editor, and that's not the way it should look. And also, when you're filling it out and you get to publisher, you can put down, if it's self-publishing, I encourage you to come up with a fake company name. It's
not a fake company name.
No. You can come up with a company name, whatever it is. Fine, put it in there. If you don't want to come up with a company name, just put in Amanda Labonté, or like if that's who you are, like, or whatever like that. Do not, for Lord's sake, put in CreateSpace or Amazon or wherever you're putting it out through, because they aren't publishing it. That, like, when I'm going through and looking through the data on someone who's published a book and I see published by X, and it's one of those published by CreateSpace. A printer. That's the same as saying, who published my book? Oh, I published it at Staples. That's not publishing. That's printing. You can also get it published, but that's not their role.
It's a red flag, I think.
It's a huge red flag.
So I think, though, an even bigger red flag for readers of self-published or indie work would probably be a work that's published without an editor's perusal.
Yeah. I think the thing that we discussed when I was talking to this group of writers was one of the things I found when I've been listening to podcasts, because I listen to a lot of podcasts from technically self-published writers, but they call themselves indie authors. And their distinction, and I think it's valid, is that they self-publish, but they treat it like a business.
Yeah.
So the art is the art,
mm-hmm.
but when they create the product, they go through the steps that a publisher would go through. They're just calling the shots on their writing timeline, their editing timeline, and when the work is going to come out. So they still...
And how it's marketed.
So they still hire editors, they all have cover artists, they all have street team and their beta group, and they go through all of those steps. Basically, it's this recognition that you can be a self-published author, put out a product that's as good as something that's traditionally published, but you're calling all of the shots on it.
So an adherence to industry standards, then.
Absolutely. So that's the difference that I felt was there between just calling yourself self-published and calling yourself an indie author. I think indie means that you've put in the work.
That's fair.
Because you can have, with all of the new Amazon categories for publishing and with all of the new Amazon categories with where to place books, there are categories for books that did not exist 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago.
And subcategories.
So there's a lot of work out there there's a market for, that writers know there's a market for, that they're interested in writing, but that no traditional publishing house is interested in touching.
Or that there are the people that control the marketing for those big publishing houses don't know how to market.
Yeah. So the big thing that indie publishing gives a writer, especially a genre writer who wants to write a series, is control over having that series come out. If you work with a traditional publisher, you don't get that say. They decide if there's a sequel. They decide if that sequel comes out in 2 years or in ever.
That's true. You were given a amount of copies sold caveat. Yes. In you had to sell X number of copies of the first one before you would get a second one greenlit. Yes. Whereas we just greenlit the whole trilogy / possibly 4 books now.
So that's not what most writers would get in a publishing house. That's why, I'm really happy, but many people who write a lot aren't happy with traditional.
Would you call us indie, or would you call us small press?
I think you're a small press publisher.
Yeah.
I think you have an indie philosophy.
Yes.
But I think even within the self-publishing community, you can see that there's a desire there to show that people want to be held to industry standards, want to show that they will put the work in, and that there's a difference between hiring a good editor and putting out your work and just finishing your novel at the end of NaNoWriMo and hitting send.
Big time. Big time.
One point that was made was this idea that in traditional publishing, your book leaves so many hands. It can be up to 7 people whose hands it goes through. I think I know the first time around, my book went through 4 sets of hands before it got published finally. Does that make it a better product, inherently?
I don't know.
And maybe that is where the expense is going, because big publishing houses have a lot more expenses.
Well, yeah, and the cut per book for an author is usually 15% or less, as opposed to, and maybe that's why we can offer more, is because it doesn't. But we still go through a lot of hands. There's Ellen, there's me, there's Aaron. Traditionally, not all your stuff has gone through all those hands, but because you produce very good work, so we know that it can skip me, basically, kind of thing. But it still goes through Ellen, and it still goes through Aaron.
Yep. I think we cut out a lot of extraneous things because they're extraneous by nature.
Yeah.
I think in terms of small press, we don't need to have a whole bunch of people having eyes on something, because the people who do have eyes on something are dedicating their full attention to it, not just 5 hours out of a 40-hour work week, let's say. So I think that's where that difference is. When we sign on to do something, we're signing on fully.
Absolutely.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think by the time I got to the final editor, they sent it back and said, change this word, and that was it. So maybe you don't need that many hands. I definitely benefited from having good editing early on.
There's also something to be said for I've worked with people who work in writers' rooms for television shows and stuff like that, and when it comes to that, so there's the writers, and then there's the executive producers, and then there's the network, unless it's a syndicated show beyond that, and at each step there are multiple editors and multiple people putting in conflicting notes and stuff like that. And that's the most annoying thing, is that if you put in through a manuscript, and Ellen and I both looked at it at once, and let's say you had a scene that was very lighthearted, you might get a note back from her saying, can this be more dark? And then you might get a note back on the same paragraph from me saying, can this be lighter? So 2 divergent notes, asking to go in to change the scene to go in 2 different directions. So what we do is we tend to have specialists, and rather than it going through all these hands, it goes through one hand that's a specialist in that genre or in that storytelling type, or X or Y or Z, because all you need is someone who's very good at that thing. You don't need 40 people who are kind of okay at that one thing.
So if you were self-publishing, would you want to call yourself a self-published author, or would you go indie author?
I would go indie author. In the early days, I call it, when it was just me being published, I used to say that we're self-published right now, but we're looking to grow. And the first person we took on was Ellen, and until we got that 3rd and 4th person, I would proudly say, we used to be self-publishers, but now we're small press, now we're indie. I used to be so proud to be able to say, oh yes, that was my first accomplishment as a company, because unless, like I said at the beginning, unless you started a publishing company tomorrow, like Labonté Publishing, with no interest in publishing your own work for some reason, who does that? And then found someone to publish and published Ellen's work. That's the only circumstance, I think, in which someone can just right off the bat be small press. Other than that, if you're publishing your own stuff starting off, and then your second title is someone else's work, By default, at the start, you're a self-publisher, and you might grow to be more than that. Since I've been teaching at THE, the tutoring center that Amanda is co-owner of,
yeah,
I've been finding myself having thoughts about the writing process more and more. Things I want to try and... I've been exercising that muscle. Like, usually I don't self-analyze about the writing process very often, which makes it hard when I get writing questions, because people expect someone who's written 17-plus novels to know how to answer X, Y, or Z, and that's only possible if the person has self-analyzed what they do, and I tend not to. And part of me is almost afraid to, because I wonder if by self-analyzing it I become too aware of it and then it doesn't work as well anymore. But doesn't seem to be happening. So that's good. But I came up with a weird thing, and I want to run it by you guys and see what you think. And that was just a blatant, simple statement that there are 3 ways to start a scene. And this comes from being asked many times over and over again, how do I start writing the novel? Like, what's the first thing you write? What's the first thing you do? And so I've developed the answer that there are 3 ways to start a scene. Whether it's the first scene or any scene, you could say the 3 ways to start your novel, but I'm leaving it at a scene. You can start with action, you can start with description, or you can start with dialogue. And either one of those 3 things dictates A, the tone of the scene, or B, the tone of the novel, if it's the first thing. So if it's description, depending on what is being described, that is more of a literary style thing. It's more slow, it's more like easing into the water kind of thing. If it's action, would be, you're still describing it, but she ran away very fast, too afraid to blink. Like, that's an action line. The characters are doing something. Or dialogue. If that's your first line is a line of dialogue, that tends to, in medias res, absorb the person right into it. It starts, you're right in the middle of the conversation, and it's a good hook to start the character. It's going to be a character-driven scene or story. You're going to find stuff out, because usually dialogue happens between 2 people. So you're setting a stage right then and there for that kind of back-and-forth interaction by starting it that way.
Thinking about it, that's probably the truth. I think I like starting things with action.
I do too.
I have started with dialogue, but generally if it's something I've read that started with dialogue, you don't know who's speaking. The scene wouldn't open with, "Don't do that," said Matt.
Yeah.
It would open with, "Don't do that," and then it's like, well, who's, kind of draws the reader in to figure out what's going on. The classic one for that I can think of is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, that everyone doesn't like because it's a capitalist manifesto, but it begins with dialogue, and the dialogue is some guy on the street shouting out, "Who is John Galt?" And there's a main character walking past, and you're immediately like, who's shouting that? Why are they shouting that? And who is John Galt? Like, what is going on? So it's a huge book, and it kind of draws the reader in, at least in the beginning, just to figure out what's happening. And I think anytime you start a scene, whether it's dialogue or description or action, where the reader is like, what is happening, they're going to keep reading.
That's interesting. And I used it as recently as Sinister Intent, my last solo published book. But starting with a line of dialogue is a good beginner way to start. Like, if you're sitting there and it's your first manuscript, and if you're listening to this and it's your first manuscript, and you really don't know how to start, like, you know what the scene is in your head, but how do you start writing it? Like, you know that this scene is between Amanda and Ellen, but how do I start it? Do I describe the setting? But that's bogging down the top of the novel too much. Do I describe the characters? That's bogging down the front of it too much. Like, there's all this stuff that you can get lost in that's not as peppy, that you want the first words and the first sentence and the first page of your novel to be. Start it with the dialogue is a great way to just jump right into that, and then a paragraph or 2 later Amanda can say something witty, and you can go into a very quick, paragraph. Amanda sharpened her quick wit while living with her mother through the age of 35 when she met her first boy. Or whatever.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. I think it's a bit harder to do description, but I do enjoy opening scenes with description. It's kind of lends itself to a slow burn.
Yes, and that's an important thing. Like, if you're starting with description, depending on what the description is, like, technically it was a dark and stormy night, is starting with description. But that sets a certain tone. But I'd almost blend that, depending on the emotion that the description's supposed to feel, I'd almost put that over into, it's bordering on action, like lightning. You're seeing lightning crash. You're seeing,
but you're not. That's what it evokes.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So in terms of description like that, it's evocative. It's not directly posing the questions to you about what things are, but it lends to your imagination more and playing on the reader and the reader's frame of reference more.
I find description can very easily say what the novel's going to be about. Like, if it's often description at the front of a novel will be setting. Sometimes it'll be character, but like if you're going to describe it that way, if you're going to open with a long paragraph or a long page of description, that's almost stating what it's going to be in one way or another at the outset.
I generally, and I'm probably not like most readers, but when I open a book and the first thing I see on the first page is a long paragraph of description, I know I'm going to have to push a little more to get through it. Yeah. I like seeing something short and choppy at the beginning that's kind of going to bring me...
I like action at the
beginning. I think if you're starting any book with a long paragraph, you've got a problem. It doesn't matter what's in that paragraph. So
Miss Dalloway?
I think that's less than about what's in that paragraph as to how it was arranged, how the book was arranged itself. I think it is a different skill set, though, to be able to write something that is that long, that is grammatically correct and conveys information. I don't know that it's a particularly useful skill set.
Exactly. I find that some authors get very caught up in that they can do something and never stop to ask themselves if they should.
Well, there's something to be said for experimenting with form.
Oh, absolutely.
To sum it up, what advice do you give to a writer who wants to know how to start their book?
Think about what you want to convey with that first line. And remember that dialogue is easy. If it's your first time and it's your first draft, so you can change this after the fact, go with that. But think about how the movie starts and then decide from there how to go.
I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to start Call of the Sea, because that was my first book. And ultimately, all I needed to do was write a scene that I thought was the beginning, write a whole bunch more, and then realize the beginning wasn't what I thought it was, and I'd already written something that was a great opening line and a great opening scene. And I was putting way too much pressure on myself to write the perfect opening scene with that in my head.
Oh, yeah.
Like, sometimes it's hiding in there, and you just write the whole thing, and then somebody else just comes along and finds it for you. Or you find it for yourself when you're rereading. Like, the way the book opens is not at all how I thought it would, but I can't picture it opening any other way now.
Well, we've reached the part of the episode when we talk about our sponsors. This episode of the Write Project podcast was sponsored by Fiction First Used Books, which is located in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia and ships worldwide. Fiction First has a wide assortment of books, but today we would like to draw attention to the Dragonlance Chronicles Trilogy, the starting point for the Dragonlance novels and the world of Krynn. All three can be yours, as of this broadcast, for only $16.50. That's it for us today. Be sure to check out our Patreon if you'd like to be a sponsor of our channel, leave a comment, and never look back.